قال الله يكفي كل شيء عن كل شيء ولا يكفي عن الله ربك من شيء لا في السماوات إنه كان علامًا كافيًا قديرًا.
Thank you very much. Allahu Akbar. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen from around the world, as we study the greatest story ever told. That's right, it is the Dawnbreakers. Before we continue, I'm going to, as per usual, give you a quick recap of what we looked at last session. Mullah Hussein was in Mashhad, in the province of Khorasan. Here, he's approached by the Salar, who's revolting against the Shah's army, who wants to come and get Mullah Hussein on board. Mullah Hussein, however, is not interested in this in any way, shape, or form. So whilst he's in Mashhad, Mullah Hussein decides that he's going to leave. He's going to go where? Where His Holiness the Bab is, which is right up here in the northwestern territory, a place called Ma'kur. Mah meaning moon, Kur meaning where is, because this prison city had a mountain that came over and you couldn't even see the moon. The Bab was there. He had no candle at night. He had no lights, there was no door to his prison cell, 2 guards and 4 dogs outside guarding his prison cell. Now Mullah Hussein decides that he's going to go by foot out of respect. So by foot he goes along, and stopping along the way he meets various people who start praising him and greeting him, and Mullah Hussein is trying to impart the knowledge that he has to them with regards to the teachings of His Holiness the Bab. As he reaches Tehran, he has an audience with none other than Baha'u'llah himself. Baha'u'llah's brother, Agha Khalim, describes the piety and the humility that Mullah Hussein has. He also says that Mullah Hussein could have achieved the triumph of the faith of God by himself. This is the respect and love that he had for Mullah Hussein. They then carry on towards Tabriz and eventually to Ma'kur to see His Holiness the Bab. This is Mullah Hussein and, of course, his attendant, Gambar Ali, who at first wanted to come, and Mullah Hussein said, no, don't come, and then allows him to come as his attendant. People try and pay for Mullah Hussein's trip, and they say, look, take these horses. And he says, no, I'm not going to do it. We're going to go by foot. As he's going towards Ma'kur, Ali Khan, who's the governor of the prison city, he has this dream where he sees none other than the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, with an attendant walking outside Ma'kur towards the bridge. He then runs down near the bridge, tries to kiss him, drops to his feet. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, disappears. All of a sudden, he wakes up. He's convinced of this dream coming true, that the next day he wakes up, he puts on his best clothes, his finest perfume, gets 3 horses prepared, one for himself, one for Mullah Hussein, and one for Gambar Ali, as we will come to realize. He then goes with the 3 horses down to the bridge, and he sees who he saw in his dream, and we realize that is Mullah Hussein and Gambar Ali. Falls to his feet, starts kissing him. Mullah Hussein says, get up. Then Ali Khan says, please take these fine horses and come with me. It's still a long way. Mullah Hussein says, no, I will go by foot. I'll come all this way by foot. I will go by foot. He then is outside the gate of the prison where he sees the Bab. He falls prostrate to the ground. His Holiness the Bab comes and stands beside him, outstretches his arms and gives him a hug. This beautiful scene between these 2 lovers. The Bab takes him in. Ali Khan is more than happy with this. Ali Khan is so blown away. He's subservient, so much so that Ali Khan, who had a daughter, the king wanted to marry his daughter, and he refused the king marrying his daughter. And he wanted the Bab to marry the daughter. The Bab refused. He then speaks to Mullah Hussein and says, please, Mullah Hussein, can you do something? I beg you, so that the Bab will marry my daughter. He said, thank you very much for the kind offer, but I won't. This is the love Ali Khan has for Mullah Hussein and for His Holiness the Bab. Ali Khan obviously giving the Bab the finest fruits and really looking after him. This is the person that's meant to be his jailer, the person incarcerating him. So sweet, it shifts and it turns. The Bab then says to Mullah Hussein, your days of horsemanship are yet to come. He then goes through some poems from Hafiz and through other people, including a beautiful poem which talks about the mystery being enshrined within its verse concealed, but it will be revealed in him. So what does this talk about, this breath that's going to come, that's going to be revealed in Hin? We know that Hin, which means literally after a while in Arabic, also has a numerical value of 68, which refers to the year 1853, when Baha'u'llah received his mission in the Siyah Chal. So there's some beautiful imagery. Haji Mirza Aghazi is informed of the fact that now Ali Khan is now treating him really well. And they're thinking, well, what's happened? Why are they treating him so well? And they say, right, we're going to move the Bab. Now, the Bab had predicted this. The Bab had said to Mullah Hussein, we will be moved from here to Chehrid. And sure enough, that was going to happen. He said, you will be in Tabriz when you get news of this. But he said, from there, he said, I want you to go to Urumiyeh, I want you to go to Khoy, I want you to go to Milan, I want you to meet all these various people, then head down to Zanjan, then Ghazvin. You will finally go on to Tehran. You will stay there. From there, you will proceed to Mazandaran, where you will meet God's hidden treasure. And that's where we were, ladies and gentlemen, on a slight cliffhanger. So we're going to see what exactly is going on. We're going to see who is this hidden treasure? Who could it be? Even though I know, I'm excited to read about it again and find out who it is.
Ali Khan cordially invited Mullah Hussein to tarry a few days in his home before his departure from Baku. He expressed a keen desire to provide every facility for his journey to Mazandaran. The latter, however, refused to delay his departure or to avail himself of the means of comfort which Ali Khan had so devotedly placed at his disposal. He, faithful to the instructions he had received, stopped at every town and village that the Bab had directed him to visit, gathered the faithful, conveyed to them the love, the greetings, and the assurances of their beloved master, quickened afresh their zeal, and exhorted them to remain steadfast in his way. In Tehran, he was again privileged to enter the presence of Baha'u'llah and to receive from his hands that spiritual sustenance which enabled him with such undaunted courage to brave the perils that so fiercely assailed the closing days of his life. From Tehran, Mullah Hussein proceeded to Mazandaran in eager expectation of witnessing the revelation of the hidden treasure promised to him by his master. Qudus was at that time living in Bar Furush, in the home which had originally belonged to his own father. He freely associated with all classes of people, and by the gentleness of his character and the wide range of his learning, had won the affection and unqualified admiration of the inhabitants of that town. Upon his arrival in that city, Mullah Hussein went directly to the home of Qudus and was affectionately received by him. Qudus himself waited upon his guest and did his utmost to provide whatever seemed necessary for his comfort. With his own hands, he removed the dust and washed the blistered skin of his feet. He offered him the seat of honor in the company of his assembled friends and introduced with extreme reverence each of the believers who had gathered to meet him. On the night of his arrival, as soon as the believers who had been invited to dinner to meet Mullah Hussein had returned to their homes, the host, turning to his guest, inquired whether he would enlighten him more particularly regarding his intimate experiences with the Bab in the castle of Baku. Many and diverse, replied Mullah Hussein, were the things which I heard and witnessed in the course of my 9 days' association with him. He spoke to me of things relating both directly and indirectly to his faith. He gave me, however, no definite directions as to the course I should pursue for the propagation of his cause. All he told me was this: on your way to Tehran, you should visit the believers in every town and village through which you pass. From Tehran, you should proceed to Mazandaran, for there lies a hidden treasure which shall be revealed to you, a treasure which will unveil to your eyes the character of the task you are destined to perform. By his allusions, I could, however, dimly perceive the glory of his revelation and was able to discern the signs of the future ascendancy of his cause. From his words, I gathered that I should eventually be called upon to sacrifice my unworthy self in his path. For on previous occasions, whenever dismissing me from his presence, the Bab would invariably assure me that I should again be summoned to meet him. This time, however, as he spoke to me his parting words, he gave me no such promise, nor did he allude to the possibility of my ever meeting him again face to face in this world. The feast of sacrifice, where his last words to me, is fast approaching. Arise and gird up the loin of endeavor, and let nothing detain you from achieving your destiny. Having attained your destination, prepare yourself to receive us, for we too shall ere long follow you. Qudus inquired whether he had brought with him any of his master's writings, and on being informed that he had none with him, presented his guest with the pages of a manuscript which he had in his possession, and requested him to read certain of its passages. As soon as he had read a page of that manuscript, his countenance underwent a sudden and complete change. His features betrayed an undefinable expression of admiration and surprise. The loftiness, the profundity, above all, the penetrating influence of the words he had read provoked intense agitation in his heart and called forth the utmost praise from his lips. Laying down the manuscript, he said, I can well realize that the author of these words has drawn his inspiration from that fountainhead which stands immeasurably superior to the sources whence the learning of men is ordinarily derived. I hereby testify to my wholehearted recognition of the sublimity of these words and to my unquestioned acceptance of the truth which they reveal. From the silence which Qudus observed, as well as from the expression which its countenance betokened, Mullah Hussein concluded that no one else except his host could have penned those words. He instantly arose from his seat and, standing with bowed head at the threshold of the door, reverently declared, the hidden treasure of which the Bab has spoken now lies unveiled before my eyes. Its light has dispelled the gloom of perplexity and doubt. Though my master be now hidden amid the mountain fastness of Azerbaijan, the sign of his splendor and the revelation of his might stand manifest before me. I have found in Mazandaran the reflection of his glory.
So there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. Mullah Hussein has done what the Bab has said. He's gone to Tehran, and from there he heads into Mazandaran, this province up here. Now, who lives in Babul, which was known as Bafurush back then? None other than Qudus. So he goes to see Qudus. Qudus receives him. Qudus bends down, wipes the dust off his feet. He gets water, starts wiping his feet down, cleaning the blisters off the feet of Mullah Hussein. Such is the subservience with which he does this. He then invites him in to meet the guests. There are people there who wanted to see Mullah Hussein, and they're blown away, and they want to know what has happened. What has Mullah Hussein learned from His Holiness the Bab? He'd just come from spending 9 days with His Holiness the Bab. Mullah Hussein explains, and he says, I was told to come here, and he shared with me that I should stop off to various cities along the way, that I should go to Zanjan, Qazvin, and Tabriz, Urumiyeh, Marageh, Milan, Khoy, and share the message. They say, okay, great. When they leave, he also shares with Qudus, he says, I was told that I would meet this hidden treasure. Also, the Bab said I would be martyred. I would get to be a martyr for his cause. And he was so happy about that. And he says, the Bab usually says to me, we will meet at this point or at that time or something. His Holiness the Bab didn't say this. I fear this may be the last time that I see His Holiness the Bab. Quddus then says to him, do you have any scriptures from the Bab? He says, no, I don't. I wasn't given anything. At this point, Quddus then pulls out a scroll, gives it to Mullah Hussein. He says, read this. Mullah Hussein reads this after one paragraph. He just stops and he's blown away. He's absolutely mind blown. And he says, I can tell that whoever's written this has drawn inspiration from the fountainhead, which stands immeasurably superior to the source of all learning. And he's just blown away. Quddus's reaction is to stand silent. Mullah Hussein at this point realizes Quddus has written this. Absolutely blown away, he is now subservient to Quddus and is going to follow what Quddus will say. The Bab had told him that Quddus would guide him, that Quddus would now be this moon of guidance, as he's referred to. I personally find it quite remarkable that the first letter of the living, the first person to find His Holiness the Bab in Shiraz, he was the one who, when the Bab was announcing he was going on pilgrimage, may have thought, I'm going to be the one going on pilgrimage. I was the first one. But he wasn't. Quddus was. And Mullah Hussein was so okay with that. He's like, that's fine. After being the first one, he's reading Quddus, which he realizes is so much superior to him. Such an incredible level of understanding he has.
Can I just ask something quickly, Dave? So
Yes.
this was definitely a letter, a manuscript written by Quddus rather than Baha'u'llah.
Correct, yes. This was Quddus who had revealed this. We will come to know that Quddus writes this beautiful piece of work called the Sad Samad when he's in the battleground of Fort Sheikh Tabarsi, which is yet to come, which is so powerful. Quddus's writings were incredible, were mind-blowing. But yes, this is by Quddus.
Dave, this reminds me of what it says in the Bible. I know it's in reference to some other things, but still the words of the Bible come to my mind when it says, the first will be last, I think, and the last will be first, or something to that extent. And of course, it makes reference to something else, but yet, I can't help but thinking of that. And you mentioning that Mullah Hussein being the first letter and Quddus being the last one, I think it's quite remarkable.
An interesting take on that. There's many meanings to many things, certainly the Bible refers to. I think the people who are at the front doing the best will become last, and the lowly people or whatever will inherit the word of God. And yeah, but you can take many meanings out of it. But yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. We're so lucky, ladies and gentlemen, to have this text here. The Guardian, there's so much work into making this happen.
I did have something else I wanted to observe, is that
Yes.
the journey of Mullah Hussein there and back through all the towns and cities is very similar to the Christ journey through all the villages prior to his capture and crucifixion.
Very true. Good point.
Thank you.
How grave, how appalling the mistake of Haji Mirza Agassi. This foolish minister had vainly imagined that by condemning the Bab to a life of hopeless exile in a remote and sequestered corner of Azerbaijan, he would succeed in concealing from the eyes of his countrymen that flame of God's undying fire. Little did he perceive that by setting up the light of God upon a hill, he was helping to diffuse its radiance and to proclaim its glory. By his own acts, by his amazing miscalculations, instead of hiding that heavenly flame from the eyes of men, he gave it still further prominence and helped to excite its glow. How fair, on the other hand, was Mullah Hussein, and how keen and sure his judgment. Of those who had known and seen him, none could for one moment question the erudition of this youth, his charm, his high integrity and amazing courage. Had he, after the death of Sayyid Kazim, declared himself the promised Qa'im, the most distinguished among his fellow disciples would have unanimously acknowledged his claim and submitted to his authority. Had not Mullah Muhammad Imam Ghani, that noted and learned disciple of Sheikh Ahmad Asai, after he was made acquainted in Tabriz by Mullah Hussein with the claims of the new revelation, declared, I take God as my witness. Had this claim which the Sayyid Bab has made been advanced by this same Mullah Hussein, I would, in view of his remarkable traits of character and breadth of knowledge, have been the first to champion his cause and to proclaim it to all people. As he, however, has chosen to subordinate himself to another person, I have ceased to have any confidence in his words and have refused to respond to his appeal. Had not Sayyid Muhammad Baqir Rashdi, when he heard Mullah Hussein so ably resolve the perplexities which had long afflicted his mind, testified in such glowing terms to his high attainments, I, who fondly imagined myself capable of confounding and silencing Sayyid Kazim Rashdi, realized, when I first met and conversed with him who claims to be only his humble disciple, how grievously I had erred in my judgment. Such is the strength with which this youth seems endowed, that if he were to declare the day to be night, I would still believe him able to deduce such proofs as would conclusively demonstrate, in the eyes of the learned divines, the truths of his statement. On the very night he was brought in contact with the Bab, Mullah Hussein, though at first conscious of his own infinite superiority and predisposed to belittle the claims advanced by the son of an obscure merchant of Shiraz, did not fail to perceive, as soon as his host had begun to unfold his theme, the incalculable benefits latent in his revelation. He eagerly embraced his cause and disdainfully abandoned whatever might hamper his own efforts for the proper understanding and the effective promotion of its interests. And when, in due course, Mullah Hussein was given the opportunity of appreciating the transcendent sublimity of the writings of Qudus, he, with his usual sagacity and unerring judgment, was likewise able to estimate the true worth and merit of those special gifts with which both the person and the utterance of Qudus were endowed. The vastness of his own acquired knowledge dwindled into insignificance before the all-encompassing, the God-given virtues which the spirit of this youth displayed. That very moment, he pledged his undying loyalty to him who so powerfully mirrored forth the radiance of his own beloved master. He felt it to be his first obligation to subordinate himself entirely to Qudus, to follow in his footsteps, to abide by his will, and to ensure by every means in his power his welfare and state. Until the hour of his martyrdom, Mullah Hussein remained faithful to his pledge. In the extreme deference which he henceforth showed to Qudus, he was solely actuated by a firm and unalterable conviction of the reality of those supernatural gifts, which so clearly distinguished him from the rest of his fellow disciples. No other consideration induced him to show such deference and humility in his behaviour towards one who seemed to be but his equal. Mullah Hussein's keen insight swiftly apprehended the magnitude of the power that lay latent in him, and the nobility of his character impelled him to demonstrate befittingly his recognition of that truth. Such was the transformation wrought in the attitude of Mullah Hussein towards Qudus that the believers who gathered the next morning at his house were extremely surprised to find that the guest who the night before had occupied the seat of honour, and upon whom had been lavished such kindness and hospitality, had given his seat to his host, and was now standing in his place at the threshold in an attitude of complete humility. The first words which, in the company of the assembled believers, Qudus addressed to Mullah Hussein were the following: "Now, at this very hour, you should arise, and armed with the rod of wisdom and of might, silence the host of evil plotters who strive to discredit the fair name of the faith of God. You should face that multitude and confound their forces. You should place your reliance upon the grace of God and should regard their machinations as a futile attempt to obscure the radiance of the cause. You should interview the Sayyid al-Ulama, that notorious and false-hearted tyrant, and should fearlessly disclose to his eyes the distinguishing features of this revelation. From thence, you should proceed to Khurasan. In the town of Mashhad, You should build a house so designed as both to serve for our private residence and at the same time afford adequate facilities for the reception of our guests. Thither we shall shortly journey, and in that house we shall dwell. To it you shall invite every receptive soul, who we hope may be guided to the river of everlasting life. We shall prepare and admonish them to band themselves together and proclaim the cause of God.
The Bab is going to be moving from Markul down to Chehreg. Haji Mirza Agassi had done all he could to try and quash the faith of the Bab. However, his attempts were futile. He tried to put him in this corner, came to absolutely nothing. Mullah Hussein could have claimed to be the leader after Sayyid Kazim had passed away. If you remember, Mullah Hussein, who was sent on a mission by Sayyid Kazim to go to Isfahan and then to go to Mashhad to gain the support of two very eminent ulamas. As he returned, Sayyid Kazim has passed away. When he came back, he could have said, I am the leader. He didn't. All he wanted to know was, what did Sayyid Kazim say? Mullah Muhammad Muhammad Ghani, who's known as the one-eyed bearded renegade, one of the leading disciples of Sayyid Kazim, he turns around and says, if Mullah Hussein had declared that he was the leader, I would have believed him if he was the one that had rose, but instead he's following Sayyid Bab. Why is he following this other guy? He's subordinated himself to him. It makes no sense. Why would he follow the Bab? I'd follow Mullah Hussein. That was his amazing insight. Sayyid Muhammad Baghir Rashdi, one of the ulamas that Mullah Hussein had actually met, had thought that he was able to take on Sayyid Kazim. And Sayyid Kazim, of course, was part of the Shaykhi school from Shaykh Ahmad. And he thought that his erudition would absolutely quash any of the writings of Sayyid Kazim. When Mullah Hussein goes to Isfahan to meet Sayyid Muhammad Baghir Rashdi, he then suddenly realizes the greatness of Mullah Hussein. And furthermore, he says, this is a disciple of Sayyid Kazim. I'm done. Impossible. Mullah Hussein, when he first met the Bab, understood who the Bab was. It was very easy for him to say his erudition and his learning and have this arrogance and no, I don't understand, but he absolutely embraced it. We know that he was able to appreciate Quddus. When Quddus up here in Bar Faroush, Babul, showed him the scrolls, Mullah Hussein recognized it instantly. Again, his learning could have gone on his way. It didn't. Mullah Hussein visits Quddus. Remember, Quddus had washed his feet, cleaned the blisters. He was the head guest and all the people were around watching him. The next day, all of a sudden, the chief seat is no longer occupied by Mullah Hussein. It's occupied by Quddus. And Mullah Hussein is standing with his head bowed towards Quddus. People see this and they're like, what's going on? Yesterday, Mullah Hussein was the guy, and then Quddus says to him, go to silence the evil plotters. He sends him on a mission, as the Bab said would happen. Go and just have faith in God, have trust in God that he's going to make everything work out. The first person he's asked and tasked to meet is the Sayyid Ulama, the guy who's going to come up again. Remember this person. He's now going to visit him. Later on, and I don't want to spoil it for you, but Mullah Hussein is going to be going on his way to what becomes the Battle of Fort Sheikh Tabarsi, and he encounters the Sayyid Ulama. He's going to come up again.
Wait, sorry if I missed something. Could you explain who or what is the Sayyid Ulama?
The highest cleric in that town. So he says, go and speak to him to see if you can win over his support, because this guy was against the Babis. So Mullah Hussein was sent, like he was sent previously, to Isfahan to talk to Sayyid Muhammad Baghir Rashdi or Askari in Mashhad. He was now being sent to the Sayyid Ulama, this other character, again, this other high clergy person. Go and speak to him and try and calm him down, win over his legions if you can.
So is Sayyid Ulama, is that a generic title? In other words, in any town in Iran at that time, the highest cleric would be titled the Sayyid Ulama, or was that his name?
It's a very good question. Ulama, I know, means clergy. I believe this to be a specific title to him.
Dave, I'd like to draw a comparison, and I think it's pretty evident in the writings, between the 12 apostles of Jesus, among whom was one called Judas, who is notorious in history for having betrayed his Lord. And Abdul Baha explains that Judas became jealous of Peter because Judas assumed that he should have primacy over Peter. And this was the notorious apostle of Jesus. Here we have the parallel of Mullah Hussein, the first to believe, a bit older than Quddus, in most people's estimation, deserving of primacy, the Babul Bab, and at every step, he was humble and faithful to the commands of his Lord. And the parallels and the distinction and the greatness of this soul are unimaginable.
Quddus has said, after you visit the Sayyid Ulama, please head on to Mashhad, and there I want you to build this house, effectively the first ever Babi center, Baha'i center, where people can meet, where people can stay, and the rest of it. So go there, and that's what you're tasked with.
Mullah Hussein set out the next day at the hour of sunrise to interview the Sayyid al-Ulama. Alone and unaided, he sought his presence and conveyed to him, as bidden by Ghudus, the message of the new day. With fearlessness and eloquence, he pleaded in the midst of the assembled disciples the cause of his beloved master, called upon him to demolish those idols which his own idle fancy had carved and to plant upon their shattered fragments the standard of divine guidance. He appealed to him to disentangle his mind from the fettering creeds of the past and to hasten free and untrammeled to the shores of eternal salvation. With characteristic vigor, he defeated every argument with which that specious sorcerer sought to refute the truth of the divine message, and exposed by means of his unanswerable logic the fallacies of every doctrine that he endeavored to propound. Assailed by the fear lest the congregation of his disciples should unanimously rally around the person of Mullah Hussein, the Sayyid Ulama had recourse to the meanest of devices and indulged in the most abusive language in the hope of safeguarding the integrity of his position. He hurled his calumnies into the face of Mullah Hussein, and contemptuously ignoring the proofs and testimonies adduced by his opponent, confidently asserted without the least justification on his part the futility of the cause he had been summoned to embrace. No sooner had Mullah Hussein realized his utter incapacity to apprehend the significance of the message he had brought him than he arose from his seat and said, "My argument has failed to rouse you from your sleep of negligence. My deeds will in the days to come prove to you the power of the message you have chosen to despise." He spoke with such vehemence and emotion that the Sayyid Ulama was utterly confounded. Such was the consternation of his soul that he was unable to reply. Mullah Hussein then turned to a member of that audience who seemed to have felt the influence of his words and charged him to relate to Ghudus the circumstances of this interview. "Say to him," he added, "inasmuch as you did not specifically command me to seek your presence, I have determined to set out immediately for Khorasan. I proceed to carry out in their entirety those things which you have instructed me to perform." Alone and with a heart wholly detached from all else but God, Mullah Hussein set out on his journey to Mashhad. His only companion as he trod his way to Khorasan was the thought of accomplishing faithfully the wishes of Ghudus, and his one sustenance the consciousness of his unfailing promise. He went directly to the home of Mirza Muhammad Bakir-e-Ghayani and was soon able to buy, in the neighborhood of that house in Bala Hibayan, a tract of land on which he began to erect the house which he had been commanded to build, and to which he gave the name Babiya, a name that adheres to the present day. Shortly after it was completed, Ghudus arrived at Mashhad and abode in that house. A steady stream of visitors whom the energy and zeal of Mullah Hussein had prepared for the acceptance of the faith poured into the presence of Ghudus, acknowledged the claim of the cause, and willingly enlisted under its banner. The all-observing vigilance with which Mullah Hussein labored to diffuse the knowledge of the new revelation, and the masterly manner in which Ghudus edified its ever-increasing adherents, gave rise to a wave of enthusiasm which swept over the entire city of Mashhad, and the effects of which spread rapidly beyond the confines of Khorasan. The house of Babiya was soon converted into a rallying center for a multitude of devotees who were fired with an inflexible resolve to demonstrate by every means in their power the great inherent energies of their faith.
He travels then from here to Mashhad in the province of Khorasan, and then he meets Mullah Muhammad Bakir-e-Ghayani. There together they purchase some land and they build this house called the Babiya. They build this. Shortly afterwards, Ghudus comes, many people come around and people start believing. Both Mullah Hussein and Ghudus are now in this vicinity.
As the appointed hour approached, when according to the dispensations of Providence, the veil which still concealed the fundamental verities of the faith was to be rent asunder, there blazed forth in the heart of Khorasan a flame of such consuming intensity that the most formidable obstacle standing in the way of the ultimate recognition of the cause melted away and vanished. That fire caused such a conflagration in the hearts of men that the effects of its quickening power were felt in the most outlying provinces of Persia. It obliterated every trace of the misgivings and doubts which had still lingered in the hearts of the believers, and had hitherto hindered them from apprehending the full measure of its glory. The decree of the enemy had condemned to perpetual isolation him who was the embodiment of the beauty of God, and sought thereby to quench for all time the flame of his love. The hand of omnipotence, however, was busily engaged at a time when the host of evildoers were darkly plotting against him, in confounding their schemes and in nullifying their efforts. In the easternmost province of Persia, the Almighty had, through the hand of Qudus, lit a fire that glowed with the hottest flame in the breasts of the people of Khorasan. And in Karbala, beyond the western confines of that land, he had kindled the light of Tahireh, a light that was destined to shed its radiance upon the whole of Persia. From the east and from the west of that country, the voice of this unseen summoned those twin great lights to hasten to the land of Ta, the dayspring of glory, the home of Baha'u'llah. He bade them each seek the presence and revolve round the person of that day star of truth, to seek his advice, to reinforce his efforts, and to prepare the way for his coming revelation. In pursuance of the divine decree, in the days when Qudus was still residing in Mashhad, there was revealed from the pen of the Bab a tablet addressed to all the believers of Persia, in which every loyal adherent of the faith was enjoined to hasten to the land of Kha, the province of Khorasan. The news of this high injunction spread with marvelous rapidity and aroused universal enthusiasm. It reached the ears of Tahireh, who at the time was residing in Karbala, and was bending every effort to extend the scope of the faith she had espoused. She had left her native town of Ghazvin and had arrived after the death of Sayyid Kazim at that holy city, in eager expectation of witnessing the signs which the departed Sayyid had foretold. In the foregoing pages, we have seen how instinctively she had been led to discover the revelation of the Bab, and how spontaneously she had acknowledged its truth. Unwarned and uninvited, she perceived the dawning light of the promised revelation breaking upon the city of Shiraz, and was prompted to pen her message and plead her fidelity to him who was the revealer of that light. The Bab's immediate response to her declaration of faith, which without attaining his presence she was moved to make, animated her zeal and vastly increased her courage. She arose to spread abroad his teachings, vehemently denounced the corruption and perversity of her generation, and fearlessly advocated a fundamental revolution in the habits and manners of her people. Her indomitable spirit was quickened by the fire of her love for the Bab, and the glory of her vision was further enhanced by the discovery of the inestimable blessings latent in his revelation. The innate fearlessness and the strength of her character were reinforced 100-fold by her immovable conviction of the ultimate victory of the cause she had embraced, and her boundless energy was revitalized by her recognition of the abiding value of the mission she had risen to champion. All who met her in Karbala were ensnared by her bewitching eloquence and felt the fascination of her words. None could resist her charm. Few could escape the contagion of her belief. All testified to the extraordinary traits of her character, marveled at her amazing personality, and were convinced of the sincerity of her convictions. She was able to win to the cause the revered widow of Sayyid Kazim, who was born in Shiraz and was the first among the women of Karbala to recognize the truth. I have heard Sheikh Sultan describe her extreme devotion to Tahireh, whom she revered as her spiritual guide and esteemed as her affectionate companion. He was also a fervent admirer of the character of the widow of the Sayyid, to whose gentleness of manner he often paid glowing tribute. Such was her attachment to Tahireh, Sheikh Sultan was often heard to remark, that she was extremely reluctant to allow that heroine, who was a guest in her house, to absent herself though it were for an hour from her presence. So great an attachment on her part did not fail to excite the curiosity and quicken the faith of her women friends, both Persian and Arab, who were constant visitors in her home. In the first year of her acceptance of the message, she suddenly fell ill, and after the lapse of 3 days, as had been the case with Sayyid Kazim, she departed this life. Among the men who in Karbala eagerly embraced through the efforts of Tahireh the cause of the Bab was a certain Sheikh Salih, an Arab resident of that city who was the first to shed his blood in the path of the faith in Tehran. She was so profuse in her praise of Sheikh Salih that a few suspected him of being equal in rank to Ghadus. Sheikh Sultan was also among those who fell under the spell of Tahireh. On his return from Shiraz, he identified himself with the faith, boldly and assiduously promoted its interests, and did his utmost to execute her instructions and wishes. Another admirer was Sheikh Mohammed Ishibil, the father of Muhammad Mustafa, an Arab native of Baghdad, who ranked high among the ulamas of that city. By the aid of this chosen band of staunch and able supporters, Tahireh was able to fire the imagination and to enlist the allegiance of a considerable number of the Persian and Arab inhabitants of Iraq, most of whom were led by her to join forces with those of their brethren in Persia, who were soon to be called upon to shape by their deeds the destiny and to seal with their lifeblood the triumph of the cause of God. The Bab's appeal, which was originally addressed to his followers in Persia, was soon transmitted to the adherents of his faith in Iraq. Tahireh gloriously responded. Her example was followed immediately by a large number of her faithful admirers, all of whom expressed their readiness to journey forthwith to Khorasan. The ulamas of Karbala sought to dissuade her from undertaking that journey, perceiving immediately the motive which prompted them to tender her such advice, and aware of their malignant design, she addressed to each of these sophists a lengthy epistle in which she set forth her motives and exposed her dissimulation.
Once Mullah Hussein goes to the house of Babia, we know that Ghadus has come and he's there, many people believe. We know that Khorasan is on the verge of kicking off. Khorasan is a place which many new ideas would come from. It was quite common in Iranian history where in this province of Khorasan up here, many new ideas would come out forth. And remember, there was a revolution that was starting to go off. You had the son of the Salar and the Salar and a guy called Jafar Guli Khan in Namdar who was trying to rebel against the forces of the Shah. So there was a lot going on there. Ghadus comes, they have many people that are coming. Tahireh has gone from her native Ghazvin, which is where she was, to none other than Karbala. So she heads down to Karbala, and we hear this incredible testament to people about Tahireh in Karbala. Sayyid Kazim's widow, who was there. Sayyid Kazim has passed away, the wife was there. Tahireh managed to go down and convert her. She is so in love with Tahireh that even if she was away from Tahireh for 1 hour, she'd say, where is she, and try and get her. After a year of being together, roughly, that's when she falls ill, and 3 days later, she passes away. Sheikh Sultan gives us the account of what's happened. Sheikh Saleh was greatly revered by Tahireh. Tahireh lavished praise upon him. Some people thought he was equal in rank to none other than Ghadus. This is how powerful a man he was. There was also Sheikh Mohammed Shibil from Baghdad originally. This was another person that she had praised very highly. And they were going to be heading over together. There were people that she was transforming, the women all around her. Anyone who listened to Tahireh were absolutely blown away. And they were going to be heading over towards Khorasan. This was the plan, that people had been summoned to go to the land of Kha. When it talks about Kha, it's talking about Khorasan, the province here. When it talks about the land of Ta, that of course is to the land of Tehran.
I have a question. Tahireh seems to be quite outspoken. She's got her views, and I'm just wondering, in that culture at that time, how would that have been received?
It would have been received really well. They loved it when women spoke out and did things that men did. They would say, wow, wonderful, because we believe in the equality of men and women. No, I think quite the opposite, probably. Tahireh was incredible. Tahireh was married. Tahireh had, depends where you read, 3 or 4 children, which she leaves her husband and she leaves her children to go to Karbala. She was a very powerful force, a phenomenal poetess, and people had huge issues with the fact that she was a woman. But there's no denying this, that this was a huge problem. However, she was so sharp that people couldn't battle her. I think she has 1,200 people, maybe we read on, that end up following her. The lay of the land hasn't changed around the world, arguably, now that when women are seen doing powerful things, this is like, come on, she's got nice hair. Oh, look at her fingernails. It's kind of, I think with Tahirih, she was quite blunt as well. There's certain things she says to her husband later on that we read, which I just find quite funny, where she just puts him in his place. She was a very powerful woman with incredible knowledge. The scholar Nader Saidi, whilst going through the writings of the Bab, I believe him to be the only person that's gone through all of them, he says he finds this place where it says that the qualities of 17 letters of the living all equal one. And the one that they equal is Tahirih. So the greatness of Tahirih is mind-blowing. Yes, she was a woman at the time, and people would have looked down upon that. But when you see greatness, you can't deny it.
I have a comment. Tahirih had a number of women who followed her devotedly. Among them was the wife of Sayyid Kazem Rashti, the sister of Mullah Hussein by the name of Nightingale of Paradise, the maid of the wife of Sayyid Kazem Rashti, her own maid, and her sister. They followed her, many of them followed her when she left Karbala. And these women are noteworthy. And later on, among her followers were the princesses of the Qajar dynasty.
There's a funny story I have involving Tahirih. I was doing the Dawnbreakers close to where I live here in Reading in England with a bunch of people, and reading wasn't their forte per se, but they were really interested in the book and really excited. And we'll do little plays based on what we've read. And one day, somebody starts like a chicken saying quack, 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 going along. And we're trying to guess which bit of the Dawnbreakers this is. It turns out that they had read, and we'll read this later on, that Tahirih escaped from somewhere in the guise of a beggar. These people had read this as a goose. So she thought Tahirih had dressed up in a goose outfit and had tried to escape from where she was, which is why they were quacking away. Very, very bizarre. Just to confirm, that did not happen. Right, we'll carry on, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry with that ridiculous story right there.
From Karbala, she proceeded to Baghdad. A representative delegation consisting of the ablest leaders among the Shia, the Sunni, the Christian, and Jewish communities of that city sought her presence and endeavored to convince her of the folly of her actions. She was able, however, to silence their protestations and astounded them with the force of her argument. Disillusioned and confused, they retired, deeply conscious of their own impotence. The ulamas of Kermanshah respectfully received her and presented her with various tokens of their esteem and admiration. In Hamadan, however, the ecclesiastical leaders of the city were divided in their attitude towards her. A few sought privily to provoke the people and undermine her prestige. Others were moved to extol openly her virtues and applaud her courage. It behooves us, these friends declared from their pulpits, to follow her noble example and reverently to ask her to unravel for us the mysteries of the Quran and to resolve the intricacies of the Holy Book. For our highest attainments are but a drop compared to the immensity of her knowledge. While in Hamadan, Tahirih was met by those whom her father, Haji Mullah Saleh, had sent from Ghazwin to welcome and urge her on his behalf to visit her native town and prolong her stay in their midst. She reluctantly consented. Ere she departed, she bade those who had accompanied her from Iraq to proceed to their native land. Among them were Sheikh Sultan, Sheikh Muhammad al-Shibl, and his youthful son, Muhammad Mustafa, Abid and his son Nasser, who subsequently was given the name of Haji Abbas. Those of her companions who had been living in Persia, such as Sayyid Muhammad al-Qutlayani, whose pen name was Tahir, and whom Tahirih had styled Fatah Maleh, and others were also bidden to return to their homes. Only two of her companions remained with her, Sheikh Saleh and Mullah Ibrahim al-Qutlayani, both of whom quaffed the cup of martyrdom, the first in Tehran and the other in Ghazwin. Of her own kinsmen, Mirza Muhammad Ali, one of the letters of the living, and her brother-in-law, and Sayyid Abdul Hadi, who had been betrothed to her daughter, traveled with her all the way from Karbala to Ghazwin. On her arrival at the house of her father, her cousin, the haughty and false-hearted Mullah Muhammad, son of Mullah Taqi, who esteemed himself next to his father and his uncle the most accomplished of all the mujtahids of Persia, sent certain ladies of his own household to persuade Tahirih to transfer her residence from her father's house to his own. "Say to my presumptuous and arrogant kinsman," was her bold reply to the messengers, "if your desire had really been to be a faithful mate and companion to me, you would have hastened to meet me in Karbala, and would on foot have guided my Hawda all the way to Ghazvin. I would, while journeying with you, have aroused you from your sleep of heedlessness and would have shown you the way of truth. But this was not to be. 3 years have elapsed since our separation. Neither in this world nor in the next can I ever be associated with you. I have cast you out of my life forever." So stern and unyielding a reply roused both Mullah Muhammad and his father to a burst of fury. They immediately pronounced her a heretic and strove day and night to undermine her position and to sully her fame. Tahirih vehemently defended herself and persisted in exposing the depravity of their character. Her father, a peace-loving and fair-minded man, deplored this acrimonious dispute and endeavored to bring about a reconciliation and harmony between them, but failed in his efforts. This state of tension continued until the time when a certain Mullah Abdullah, a native of Shiraz and fervent admirer of both Sheikh Ahmad and Sayyid Kazem, arrived in Ghazvin at the beginning of the month of Ramadan in the year 1263 AH. Subsequently, in the course of his trial in Tehran, in the presence of the Sahib Divan, this same Mullah Abdullah recounted the following: "I have never been a convinced Babi. When I arrived at Ghazvin, I was on my way to Mahbub, intending to visit the Bab and investigate the nature of his cause. On the day of my arrival at Ghazvin, I became aware that the town was in a great state of turmoil. As I was passing through the marketplace, I saw a crowd of ruffians who had stripped a man of his headdress and shoes, had wound his turban around his neck, and by it were dragging him through the streets. An angry multitude was tormenting him with their threats, their blows, and curses. His unpardonable guilt, I was told, in answer to my inquiry, is that he has dared to extol in public the virtues of Sheikh Ahmad and Sayyid Kazem. Accordingly, Haji Muhammad Taqi, the Hujjatul Islam, has pronounced him a heretic and decreed his expulsion from the town." I was amazed at the explanation given me. How could a Sheikhi, I thought to myself, be regarded as a heretic and be deemed worthy of such a cruel treatment? Desirous of ascertaining from Mullah Taqi himself the truth of this report, I betook myself to his school and asked whether he had actually pronounced such a condemnation against him. "Yes," he bluntly replied. "The God whom the late Sheikh Ahmadi Bahraini worshipped is a God in whom I can never believe. Him, as well as his followers, I regard as the very embodiments of error." I was moved that very moment to smite his face in the presence of his assembled disciples. I restrained myself, however, and vowed that, God willing, I would pierce his lips with my spear so that he would never be again able to utter such blasphemy. I straightway left his presence and directed my steps toward the market, where I bought a dagger and a spearhead of the sharpest and finest steel. I concealed them in my bosom, ready to gratify the passion that burned within me. I was waiting for my opportunity when one night I entered the masjid, in which he was wont to lead the congregation in prayer. I waited until the hour of dawn, at which time I saw an old woman enter the masjid, carrying with her a rug, which she spread over the floor of the mihrab. Soon after, I saw Mullah Taqi enter alone, walk to the mihrab, and offer his prayer. Cautiously and quietly, I followed him and stood behind him. He was prostrating himself on the floor, when I rushed upon him, drew out my spearhead, and plunged it into the back of his neck. He uttered a loud cry. I threw him on his back, and unsheathing my dagger, drove it hilt deep into his mouth. With the same dagger, I struck him at several places in his breast and side, and left him bleeding in the mihrab. I ascended immediately the roof of the masjid and watched the frenzy and agitation of the multitude. A crowd rushed in and, placing him upon a litter, transported him to his house. Unable to identify the murderer, the people seized the occasion to gratify their basest instincts. They rushed at one another's throats, violently attacked and mutually accused one another in the presence of the governor. Finding out that a large number of innocent people had been gravely molested and thrown into prison, I was impelled by the voice of my conscience to confess my act. I accordingly besought the presence of the governor and said to him, "If I deliver it into your hands the author of this murder, will you promise me to set free all the innocent people who are suffering in his place?" No sooner had I obtained from him the necessary assurance than I confessed to him that I had committed the deed. He was not disposed at first to believe me. At my request, he summoned the old woman who had spread the rug in the mihrab, but refused to be convinced by the evidence which she gave. I was finally conducted to the bedside of Mullah Taqi, who was on the point of death. As soon as he saw me, he recognized my features. In his agitation, he pointed with his finger to me, indicating that I had attacked him. He signified his desire that I be taken away from his presence. Shortly after, he expired. I was immediately arrested, was convicted of murder, and thrown into prison. The governor, however, failed to keep his promise and refused to release the prisoners.
Tahirah has gone from Karbala to Baghdad. So she's heading from here to Baghdad. Once she goes to Baghdad, she then is going to be heading over to Khorasan. She stops in Kermanshah, this town here first, and in Kermanshah, she's quite well received. It's said that as she goes, in the footnote, it says that she has 1,200 people that are following her. Can you imagine this woman in Iran at the time going through with 1,200 people, this procession essentially? In Kermanshah, she was very much appreciated. In Hamadan, however, that wasn't quite the case. It was a bit of 50-50. Some people said, look, maybe we should believe her. Some people wanted to believe, some people didn't. Haji Mullah Saleh, her father, had conveyed a message to her, please come to Ghazvin. Now, Ghazvin isn't on the way, as you can see, but her father says, please come back to Ghazvin. Tahirah was from Ghazvin. Now, why should she do this? Because, again, she had left her husband, and the father was hoping on trying to reconcile, perhaps, their marriage, or you know, just come home for a while. So out of love and respect for her father, she then heads back to Ghazvin. She then has a conversation with her husband, which is so powerful. And I just find it quite cool, the way in which she speaks. She says to her husband, remember this lowly woman, as she's meant to be perceived as, not that she was, God forbid. If you were faithful to me, you would have guided my howdah. Now, the howdah is the kind of horse and the cart that people carry on to, you know, when you see like kings and queens. It says you would have guided the whole thing by foot. You would have walked in front of me, you would have guided me, and I would have educated you, and I would have awakened you from your sleep. Quite harsh words, quite stern words to her husband. That's what you should do. She's like, I never want association with you again. The husband was Mullah Muhammad. The dad was Mullah Taghi, who we hear about in our story in a minute. We then go on to hear about the story in Ghazvin of somebody who I like to call Mr. Reasonable, who goes by the name of Mullah Abdullah. Now, Mullah Abdullah was a man from Shiraz, a very reasonable guy who would never overreact to anything he saw. He was fond of Sayyid Kazim and Sheikh Ahmad. He wasn't quite a convinced Babi, but he was mulling it over. He's there, and what does he see? One person who was talking about the teachings of Sheikh Ahmad and Sayyid Kazim is now being dragged through the streets and being beaten. Mullah Abdullah is not happy with this. He's a just man. He's a fair man. So he wants to know who is responsible. He then asks, and he finds out that Haji Mullah Taghi is the person who's responsible. Now, this person is Tahirah's father-in-law. Were you responsible for causing this beating? And he says, absolutely I was. There's no way I could let Sheikh Ahmad al-Bahraini, of course, we know him as Sheikh Ahmad al-Asai, but he'd come recently from Bahrain. That's where he was living, not where he was born. And he says, yes, these teachings are being said about all these things, and I don't agree. So therefore, yes, I pronounce that this punishment should take place. Mullah Abdullah, Mr. Reasonable, has two options. He can either have a go at him and say, well, I think that's quite unjust, or he could do what he did. He heads off into the market and he buys a dagger and a spearhead of the finest steel. And this is, I don't know why it's mentioned, but it is mentioned. It was none of this cheap stuff. It was the best steel possible. So he buys the finest steel, a spearhead and a dagger. He then goes to the mosque. He then waits and he's looking down at the mihrab, and this is where you'd sort of pray and when you'd face Mecca. And an old lady comes in and she puts her rug down. He goes to the side. Haji Mullah Taghi then comes down. And he's going to be leading the congregational prayer. This is when Mullah Abdullah goes behind him, grabs his spear, stabs it in the back, flips him over, stabs him in the tongue, and then repeatedly stabs him in the chest. Mr. Reasonable, some may say that was a slight overreaction to what was taking place, but this is what Mullah Abdullah, with his sharpest, his finest steel, only the best steel, ladies and gentlemen, he commits this horrible atrocity. He then decides, I know, I'm going to go on the roof of the mosque and I'm just going to watch. So he's sitting up there just looking over. Meanwhile, people rush in, they try and take him to hospital, and people start shouting at each other. Everyone's accusing everyone. It was you, no, it was you, no, it was your uncle, blah, blah, blah. He sits there and he watches for a while and he just doesn't say anything, Mr. Reasonable. Later on, we realise that lots of innocent people are put in prison. At this point, Mullah Abdullah feels just a little bit bad. So he goes and tells the governor, he says, look, if I tell you who did this, will you release the innocent people from prison? They say, yes, we will do. Are you sure? He says, fine. So then the old lady is brought and the old lady says, yes, I saw him. He came, I put the carpet down and blah, blah, blah. And the governor says, no, I don't believe her. Only when he marches to where Haji Mullah Taghi is, who's still on his deathbed, he goes there, that we see Haji Mullah Taghi pointing with his finger saying, it was him, it was him. And then that's only when it's believed what's taken place.
The candor and sincerity of Mullah Abdullah greatly pleased the Sahib Divan. He gave secret orders to his attendants to enable him to escape from prison. At the hour of midnight, the prisoner took refuge in the home of Reza Khan-i Sardar, who had recently been married to the sister of the Sipa Salar, and remained concealed in that house until the great struggle of Sheikh Tabarsi, when he determined to throw in his lot with the heroic defenders of the fort. He, as well as Reza Khan, who followed him to Mazandaran, quaffed eventually the cup of martyrdom.
So Mullah Abdullah goes on to become a Babi. He loses his life, is martyred in the Battle of Fort Sheikh Tabarsi. And he was staying in the house of Reza Khan, who also ends up being martyred there. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we're going to pause there for tonight, with your permission. Are there any comments or questions before we go into our devotional portion?
I wanted to ask if there's any significance in recounting the fact that there was a murderer who became a Babi and then was martyred because of the status of martyrdom, and how that would have worked.
Good question, Sandra. The reason why this is mentioned, actually, it sets up the rest of the story that we're going to go on and find out. Because essentially what's going to happen is, remember, this is Tahire's father-in-law who's been murdered. Tahire and her husband were not getting on, they were apart, and she said, I do not want to be with you. So what this does is this now implicates Tahire. So I think the reason why we're giving the story about he's the guy who ended up murdering is to just sort of set the background of what's happened there. It's certainly not to glorify the fact that he was a murderer and he ended up changing his ways. Clearly, I would suspect that Mullah Abdullah had some issues, because I don't think it's normal to see this and then go and buy, spearhead and steal, and to commit that murder.
Martyrdom was like the ultimate thing you could do for your faith. All the other martyrs were of high... Well,
absolutely. Of course, it is the ultimate sacrifice, yes. So I guess he turned his page. He ended up, after committing a horrible atrocity, ended up...
So there's no point about the fact that even though you can be a murderer, the most heinous of crimes, you can still be redeemed.
I guess that's a question for God, but you make a good point. You make a good point, John. Yes, that whatever you've done in your life or whatever things you've committed, it comes down to this, your dying breath, I guess, how things end.
We have also the history of David and what he did. So there are many cases where people have, same for Paul, who martyred a Christian and then became an apostle.
Exactly. It's the point of it. It's not, I've done X, Y, and Z, therefore I'm this. It's a continual journey. But yeah, just to confirm, when Sina was talking about what David did, that was not a reference to myself. I have not killed anybody or done anything bad to that degree, I hope, or this is what I'm going to tell you all anyway. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Unless there's any other comments or questions, we will now shift on to our devotional portion. Thank you very much, and bye for now. O God, my beloved, my heart's desire.